Hello friends, Royal Guards are trained to remain calm no matter what happens. But what happens when visitors cross the line? From people grabbing horses' reins to disrespectful tourists, dangerous behavior, and police interventions, these are some of the moments when Royal Guards had no choice but to step in. Watch until the end, because some of these encounters are truly shocking. Everything seemed completely normal until the horse suddenly started striking its hoof against the ground. A police officer immediately became alert. Looking toward the horse, he noticed a man approaching while apparently carrying a knife. The officer immediately confronted him, but the moment the man noticed the officer, he tried to walk away. The police stopped him and asked whether he had a knife. The man quickly slipped the knife into his pocket and insisted that he had nothing.
Come over here now. Hey.
I've come from work,
I
bro.
see you, but you had a knife in your hand.
I'm not
Come to the
intimidating
side.
nobody.
Right, go over there, right?
But the officer had already seen it. He escorted the man away while several officers questioned him. Even after repeated questioning, the man continued denying that he had anything. After a long argument, more officers arrived to assist. The man still refused to admit anything. Eventually, the officers took him inside for further checks and questioning. For quite some time, 3 rude teenagers kept mocking the Royal Guard and disturbing his horse. Several armed police officers arrived and tried to reason with them, but the teenagers refused to listen. The officers eventually stepped away and gave the guard a signal. The guard immediately moved his horse forward toward the 3 boys. The teenagers suddenly panicked and ran away from the scene, finally leaving the guard and his horse in peace. A royal guard approached another mounted guard when he noticed a woman standing directly beside the horse. Instead of moving away, the woman remained in the horse's path. The guard politely asked her to step back, but she began arguing with him instead. As the guard prepared to move on, the woman deliberately stood directly in his path again. The guard raised his voice, telling her to move out of the way, but instead the woman suddenly struck him hard on the shoulders with a can of Pringles. The guard didn't react and simply continued walking away. The woman then began shouting, claiming that her arm had been hurt. Seeing the situation, the police approached her and tried to understand what had happened. The woman continued making a scene and shouting for quite some time. Eventually, she walked away on her own. A man with visible blood marks on his head walked past the King's Guard horse. He suddenly moved toward the horse and appeared to intentionally try to hit his head against its face. He narrowly missed, but instead of stopping, he continued walking toward another mounted guard. A moment later, he bumped his head against that horse as well. The guard immediately told him to move away. The man apologized and tried to walk away, but the police had noticed everything. An officer quickly followed him and stopped him to ask why he had behaved that way. After speaking with him, the officer gave him a warning and eventually allowed him to leave. A woman first stood extremely close to the King's Guard while posing for a photo, but she didn't stop there. She then tried to place her hand on the guard. The guard immediately shouted at her, ordering her to move away. Startled by his reaction, the woman quickly stepped back and left the area. An intoxicated man suddenly approached the female royal guard and stepped inside the white line. The guard immediately told him to move back behind the line. Instead of listening, the man started arguing and even moved further inside. The guard immediately moved her horse toward him and firmly warned him to leave the area. The man finally backed away and walked off. Moments later, a police officer also arrived to check on the situation. A group of school children repeatedly started mocking and verbally abusing a royal guard. The disrespectful behavior continued for several moments until an armed police officer stepped in. The officer took the most disruptive student aside and gave him a serious warning. Soon the student's teacher and the rest of the group arrived. The officer then firmly told the entire group to leave the area.
He has ruined the whole lot for you, right? I want your whole group left. Next to the property, okay? So I'm withdrawing your right to speak now. Okay, so I'm asking you to leave. Either that way or that way. And you can blame them, okay?
After a short while, the police officer escorted the group away, bringing the disruption to an end. A female royal guard was calmly performing her duty when a rude teenage boy suddenly approached her and started behaving disrespectfully toward her and her horse just to make a reel.
He's being rude. Shouting. Go on. on earth is... Yeah.
Nearby tourists noticed what was happening and tried to stop him. But instead of backing away, the teenager started arguing with them too.
You're a sausage. Look at you, spastic. Fuck off. Go on.
I can't, that's my phone. You can't touch it without handing your face.
Go on, piss off.
Say that to my face.
Piss off. Piss off.
Who the fuck are you touching, you know?
Piss off.
Who the fuck are you touching?
Piss off now. I said piss off. You. Piss off.
Who the fuck are you touching? Who the fuck are you touching?
As the situation continued to escalate, the police were eventually called. The officers arrived and took control of the situation.
Call her a sausage.
Brother, why are you attacking man for, bro? Leave us stand, bro. I didn't do shit. Calm down. I didn't do shit, cuz. Did you not see what happened?
I've got it on camera.
I did not threaten nobody, bro.
Sorry. He was being really rude to her. Oh, look at that, arrested.
In the end, the teenager was arrested, bringing the disturbing incident to an end. A woman stepped extremely close to the King's Guard to take a photo with the horse. Suddenly, the horse tried to bite her. Instead of stepping back, she slapped the horse on the face. Moments later, the horse tried again, and she slapped it a second time. The guard initially remained silent, but when the horse made a third attempt, the woman slapped it once again instead of moving away. This time, the guard immediately shouted at her and ordered her to leave. Another royal guard quickly stepped in and shouted loudly, causing the nearby tourists to move out of the way. An armed police officer also arrived to assess the situation, but by then, the woman had already left the area. A man suddenly stepped across the white line and started taking a photo far too close to the King's Guard. The guard immediately shouted loudly, startling the man. He jumped back in shock and quickly moved away from the restricted area, a simple reminder that the King's Guard's boundaries are there for a reason. A man quietly walked straight toward the King's Guard, as if the guard hadn't even noticed him. He grabbed the horse's reins and stood directly beside the horse. The guard immediately shouted, ordering the man to move away. Instead of leaving, the man apologized and then tried to stand there again for another photo. This time, the guard firmly ordered him to leave and made him step away from the horse. An armed police officer then approached and warned the man to leave the area. The man finally backed away and moved on. A Chinese tourist stepped a little too close to the King's Guard horse while posing for a photo. Suddenly, the horse accidentally stepped on her slipper. She immediately moved away, but her little child rushed over and tried to pull the slipper out from underneath the horse's hoof. The mother quickly grabbed her child and pulled him back to safety. A few moments later, the horse lifted its hoof on its own, allowing the woman to safely retrieve her slipper. Thankfully, everyone walked away safely. A woman and a man walked up and stood extremely close to the King's Guard to pose for a photo. But the woman went even further and tried to place her hand on the guard's shoulder. The guard immediately gave her a stern look, clearly making his boundaries known. But the woman still remained there. Instead of arguing, the guard simply stepped away and continued with his duty. A woman suddenly walked up to a female Royal Guard's horse and began trying to adjust the horse's bridle without asking for permission. The guard immediately shouted at her, making it clear that she had crossed the line. The woman quickly backed away and ran off from the area. A reminder that approaching a Royal Guard horse without permission can be extremely dangerous. A Chinese couple was taking a photo with the King's Guard and his horse when the man's water bottle suddenly slipped from his hand and fell near the horse's feet. As the horse moved, the bottle rolled further inside the sentry box. The man tried to ask the guard for permission to retrieve it, but the guard remained completely silent. The couple eventually walked away. A short while later, another Chinese tourist approached and tried to ask the guard for permission to pick up the bottle. The guard gave her a stern look, clearly signaling that she should leave it alone, but she still tried to reach for it. The guard immediately shouted at her, forcing her to step away from the horse and leave the area. A girl suddenly walked up to the King's Guard and grabbed the horse's reins. The guard became extremely angry and immediately shouted at her, ordering her to let go and move away. Startled by the guard's reaction, The girl quickly backed away and left the area. In another similar moment, a man suddenly walked up and grabbed the King's Guard horse's reins. The horse became visibly irritated and tried to bite the man, but he still refused to let go. The guard became angry and shouted at him to release the reins, but the man continued holding on. The guard shouted again, this time even more firmly. Finally, the man let go of the reins and stepped away from the horse. In another similar moment, a man suddenly grabbed the King's Guard horse's reins, as if he were trying to take control of the horse. The guard immediately told him to let go, but instead, the man reached out and placed his hand on the guard's uniform. The guard instantly reacted and gave the man a light kick, forcing him to step away. The man finally backed off and left the area. A woman suddenly walked up and grabbed the King's Guard horse's reins. The guard immediately shouted, telling her to let go, but she didn't listen. The guard shouted again, this time much more firmly. Startled by his reaction, the woman finally let go and quickly ran away from the horse. A boy stood far too close to the King's Guard while posing for a photo. The guard suddenly shouted at him, ordering him to move away. Startled, the boy quickly stepped back, but the situation didn't end there. The boy's father became upset and went to speak with the guard's superior to report what had happened. A tourist suddenly walked up and grabbed the King's Guard horse's reins while posing for a photo. The female guard immediately told him to let go of the reins. But before he listened, the horse became visibly spooked. The guard instantly became angry and shouted at the man, ordering him to leave the area. Her loud warning quickly caught everyone's attention. Another royal guard and 2 police officers rushed over to see what had happened. One of the officers calmly explained to the tourist that visitors must never grab the horse's reins, because doing so means taking control of the horse and can put both the horse and people nearby at risk. The tourist finally stepped away and the situation was brought under control. A tourist became so distracted while talking to someone that he didn't notice the royal guards marching straight toward him. Even as they got closer, he remained completely unaware. The guards continued their march and eventually passed right over him as he failed to move out of their path. A surprising reminder to always pay attention when the royal guards are marching. A group of children repeatedly stood near the King's Guard, laughing and joking around for quite some time. The guard patiently tolerated it, but after hearing them for so long, he finally walked over and warned the children to move away. The children quickly understood and left the area. A woman stood far too close to the King's Guard and repeatedly tried to touch the horse. The guard moved his horse slightly away, creating more distance between them. But the woman continued doing the same thing. Eventually, she walked away, but then came back and stood extremely close to the horse again. This time, the guard reacted immediately and gave her a light kick, forcing her to step away from the horse. She finally left the area. A man first grabbed the King's Guard horse's reins and stood there to pose for a photo. The guard noticed him, but initially said nothing. After taking the photo, the man let go of the reins, but moments later, he grabbed both reins again and stood there for another photo. This time, the guard shouted at him to let go of the reins, but the man still refused. Growing frustrated, the guard moved his horse forward toward the man, forcing him to finally step away. Afterward, the guard reported the incident to the police. A police officer then approached the man and calmly explained why grabbing the horse's reins was not allowed. A tourist suddenly grabbed the King's Guard horse's chain. When the female guard tried to move the horse away, the man refused to let go. Instead, he actually tried to pull the horse closer toward himself. The guard immediately shouted at him and moved the horse forward, forcing the man to finally step away. Even then, the man continued smiling and acted as if the whole situation was funny. The guard immediately reported the incident to the armed police. A police officer then approached the man and gave him a firm warning about interfering with the horse. 2 Chinese tourists were standing extremely close to the female royal guard while posing for a photo. A police officer noticed and warned them to step back. One of the women immediately moved away, but the other refused to leave her position. Finally, the female guard shouted at her, and she finally stepped back. But just moments later, another woman approached and stood extremely close to the guard again. The guard immediately shouted once more and moved her horse toward the woman to make her step away. The warning was clear. The horse and guard needed their space. A tourist suddenly grabbed the King's Guard horse's reins while trying to take a photo. The guard immediately shouted and moved the horse toward him, forcing him to let go. Instead of apologizing, the man became offended and even tried to argue with the guard. But the guard remained firm, keeping the man at a safe distance. The man didn't dare come any closer. A police officer soon arrived as well, and the situation quickly settled down. The man eventually took a photo from a respectful distance and walked away.